The night was silent, as if the world had held its breath. High on the hill of Pedra Serena, where the wind seemed to converse with the stars, a woman walked slowly, carrying a small wooden box in her hands. Her name was Mari Luz, and few knew of her existence. She didn't appear on social media, she didn't frequent the city centers, and her house was surrounded by ancient trees that seemed to protect her from the elements. But that night, something different pulsed in her heart. It was as if an invisible force was calling her to a meeting that could not be postponed. Inside the box, wrapped in hand-embroidered red fabric, was the rose of prosperity. It was no ordinary flower. Its petals had a subtle glow, as if made of liquid light, and its scent was not merely sweet. It was deep, as if carrying memories of past lives. Mari Luz didn't know exactly how the rose had come to her. She only remembered a dream, weeks ago, in which a voice said, "God has revealed it. The rose is yours, but not to keep. It is to give." Since then, she had been waiting for the right moment. And now, under the starry sky, she knew it had arrived. The walk to the abandoned temple took almost an hour. The place, forgotten by many, still held traces of an ancient faith. The stone walls were covered in moss, but in the center, where an altar had once stood, there was now only a circle of clean earth, as if time respected that space. Mari Luz entered, knelt before the circle, and opened the box. The rose glowed softly, as if recognizing the place. And then, without knowing exactly why, she began to speak. "God, if you're here, listen. I have brought what was entrusted to me. Not for me, but for those in need. May this rose find those who thirst for light. May those who know how to listen prosper. May it bloom where there is silence." The wind blew harder, and a leaf fell from the ceiling, landing on the rose. Mari Luz understood. It was time to leave, but not with the rose. She should leave it there for anyone ready to find it. The next morning, a man named Elias walked the hillside trail. He didn't know why he had chosen that path. He was an accountant, surrounded by numbers, and rarely allowed himself to deviate. But that morning, something was bothering him, a void that not even prophets could fill. When he reached the temple, he felt a shiver. He entered slowly and saw the rose in the center of the circle. He approached, knelt, and as he touched the flower, a wave of heat ran through his body. It wasn't pain. It was memory. It was as if something inside him had awakened. At that moment, Elias heard the same voice Mari Luz had heard weeks before. "God has revealed. The rose is yours, but not to keep. It is to give." He didn't understand, but he knew he couldn't ignore it. He carefully took the rose, wrapped it in the red cloth, and returned home. In the following days, his life began to change. Not in numbers, but in people. He began to listen more, to help more, to feel more. And with each gesture, the rose seemed to shine brighter. Elias then understood. The rose was not an object. It was a mission, a blessing that multiplied when shared. And so, his journey began. From city to city, from soul to soul, passing the rose, not physically, but in the form of gestures, words, and listening. And each person who received it felt it. And each person who felt it prospered, not with money, but with meaning. Elias couldn't explain what was happening. Ever since he had touched the rose of prosperity, something inside him had changed. It wasn't magic, nor a miracle. It was as if a forgotten part of his soul had been awakened. He, who had previously lived for spreadsheets and goals, now began his day in silence. He listened to the wind, watched the sky, and felt something greater guiding his steps. The rose, carefully stored on its shelf, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. And each time he approached it, he felt a presence, not physical, but spiritual, as if God were there, watching, waiting. It was on one of these mornings that Elias had a dream. He was in a field of flowers, surrounded by thousands of roses just like the one he had received. In the center, a woman with white hair and deep eyes looked at him tenderly. "You don't own the rose. You're a messenger. It must go." Elias woke with his heart racing. He knew what he had to do. He took the rose, wrapped it again in the red cloth, and left with no clear destination in sight. He simply walked, guided by a force he couldn't name. He reached the town's central square, where a popular market was taking place. Among the fruit and craft stalls, he saw a woman sitting on the ground, holding a handwritten sign. "I listen to stories in exchange for silence." Elias approached, curious. The woman, named Clara, had a serene look and an energy that seemed to calm the room. He sat down beside her and, without knowing why, began to tell his story. He spoke of the rose, the temple, the dream, the transformation. Clara listened without interrupting, and when he finished, he simply said, "The rose needs to be planted, but not in the ground, in the heart." Elias handed the rose to Clara. She held it gently, as if receiving a secret, and in that instant, something happened. The air seemed to vibrate. The people around stopped for a second, and a child passing by looked at Clara and smiled, as if recognizing something in her. Clara then stood up, walked to an ancient tree in the center of the square, and placed the rose among the branches, not to hide it, but to make it visible. And there the rose shone, not with light, but with presence. In the following days, people began to gather around the tree. They didn't know exactly why. They just felt something was there. Some cried, some laughed, some just remained silent. But everyone left feeling different. And Clara, who continued to listen to stories, always said the same thing. God has revealed it. The rose is yours, but not to keep. It's to give. The news spread, not virally, but whispered. And soon, other cities began to talk about the rose of prosperity, not as an object, but as a symbol of listening, of presence, of transformation. And each person who touched the rose, or simply approached it, felt something change, not in the external world, but within themselves. It was as if God were planting invisible seeds in every soul willing to listen. Elias, now far from the rose, continued his journey. He knew his mission was not to keep it, but to spread it. And so, he began to write texts, letters, reflections. He spoke about the rose, about Clara, about Marie-Louise, about the temple. And each word seemed to carry the same energy as the flower. People began to read, to share, to feel. And the rose, even from a distance, continued to bloom, in gestures, in glances, in silences. Time passed, and the rose of prosperity continued to bloom, not in gardens, but in gestures. Clara, now known as the guardian of the tree, welcomed visitors from all over. People came seeking answers, healing, meaning. But she never promised miracles. She simply listened. And as she listened, something happened. It was as if the rose, even still among the branches, multiplied in each heart that opened. And so, the square became an invisible sanctuary, where silence was more powerful than any prayer. Elias, for his part, continued his mission as a messenger. His texts began to circulate on social media, on blogs, and on school bulletin boards. But he never signed his name. He used only one phrase: God has revealed. The rose is yours. And this phrase, simple and mysterious, began to spread like a seed in the wind. People began repeating it, sharing it, tattooing it. It was as if the rose had become a secret language between awakened souls. It was then that something unexpected happened. A young woman named Luna, a philosophy student, found one of Elias's texts in a coffee shop. She read it, reread it, and felt something vibrate inside her. It was as if those words had been written for her. She searched for more texts, found others, and decided to go to the town where the rose was. When she reached the square, she saw Clara sitting under the tree, listening to a woman talk about loss. Luna waited, and when her turn came, she didn't speak. She just cried. Clara hugged her, and in that moment, Luna felt she had found what she was looking for. Not answers, but acceptance. In the following days, Luna began helping Clara. She organized meetings, wrote down stories, cared for the tree. And little by little, she began writing too. Her texts had a different tone from Elias's, more poetic, more intuitive. But they carried the same essence. And when Elias learned of her existence, he went to the square. The two met under the tree, and they didn't need to say much. They simply looked at each other, smiled, and understood. The rose had chosen another messenger. From that day on, Luna and Elias began working together, not as leaders, but as servants of the rose. They created a small space next to the square called the Listening House. There, anyone could enter, sit, talk, or simply remain silent. There were no rules, no schedules, just presence. And the rose, even from the outside, seemed to bless each encounter. It was as if God were there, not as a distant figure, but as a constant breath. Meanwhile, in other cities, similar trees began to appear. People who had visited the square returned to their communities and planted roses, not physical, but symbolic. They created spaces for listening, for welcoming, for sharing. And in each place, the same phrase was repeated: God has revealed. The rose is yours. It was as if an invisible web were being woven, connecting hearts through a flower that cannot be seen, but can be felt. And then, on a full moon night, Clara called Elias and Luna for a chat. The three of them were under the tree, silent. Clara looked at them and said, "The rose must move on. It can't stay stuck in one place. It is movement." Elias and Luna understood. It was time to leave, not abandon, but expand, to take the rose to other corners, other souls, other silences. And so, with hearts full of gratitude, they began to plan their next journey. Elias and Luna's journey became a movement. They didn't carry the physical rose, they carried the essence. In each city they visited, they left invisible seeds, words, listening, gestures. And in each place, someone emerged who understood, not with their mind, but with their heart. It was as if God were breathing upon each awakened soul, revealing that prosperity was not about accumulation, but about connection. In a forgotten village among the mountains, they met a woman named Iracema. She lived alone, surrounded by ancient books and medicinal plants. When she heard the story of the rose, she smiled with her eyes and said, "This flower has already passed through me, but I wasn't ready. Now I am." Elias and Luna understood that the rose didn't follow a straight line. It circled, waited, returned. It was patient as time, steadfast as faith. Iracema then revealed something no one expected. In her books, there were records of a similar flower, described by ancient people as the rose that cannot be seen, but transforms. According to the texts, it appeared in cycles, always when humanity forgot to listen. And it was always delivered by simple hands, open hearts. Elias was silent. Luna wept. It was as if everything was connected. Marilu's, Clara, the tree, the text, the encounters. The rose was older than any name, deeper than any belief. They then decided to return to the hill of Pedra Serena, where it all had begun. They climbed together in silence and found the temple as it was, abandoned but alive. In the center, the circle of earth still clean. Elias knelt, Luna placed a lit candle, and Iracema opened one of the books. They began to read quietly, as if summoning memories. And then the wind blew hard. The surrounding trees swayed, and a petal fell from the sky, not from a flower, but from the invisible. It was a sign. God was there. Elias then spoke. God has revealed. The rose is ours, but not to keep. It is to give. Luna added, and whoever receives flourishes. Iracema smiled, and whoever flourishes listens. The temple, for a moment, seemed to breathe, and in that moment, they understood that the mission was endless. Because the rose wasn't a destination, it was a path. In the following months, they created the Circle of the Rose, a space without walls, without hierarchies, where anyone could enter, listen, and share. There were no leaders, only temporary guardians, and the rose, though invisible, was present in every gesture. People began to report changes, reconciliations, healings, important decisions. But no one attributed them to the flower. The rose didn't want credit. It wanted movement. And so, the blessing spread, not as doctrine, but as a seed, in schools, hospitals, prisons, and businesses. The phrase, God has revealed, the rose is yours, became a symbol of listening, of presence, of true prosperity. And each time someone repeated it, something happened. Not outside, inside. Elias, now older, wrote his last letter. If you have found this rose, don't hold it back. Give it away, because to prosper is to allow others to bloom as well. Luna, now guardian of the circle, continued to listen. And Irasima, in her house among the mountains, wrote new books, not about the rose, but about the silence it taught. And God continued to reveal, not aloud, but in every heart that dared to listen.